thing for that person is to trust them in God's hands. Because if you try to get them back, they have anger or resentment against the guy you're trying to pull them back to. Only God knows how to pull a person that leaves him back to him. And the Bible says no one can take you out of God's hand. They may think they have left, but God still got them right there. If that's his daughter, he still got her right here. He's going to let her go. And see, the thing about the prodigal son is, God will let you go and let the pig show you what you missed out on. And what happens is you'll go out there, well, I don't want nothing to do with this Jesus. Man, people walk away from God all the time, but they always run and crawl back because the devil will beat the mess out of you. This world will mess you up until that person say, you know what, it was better in my Father's house. Give her time. Pray for her. And over time, watch. If she's really in God's hand, if she's really his child, in time she'll be back. The best thing for you to do is to pray for her, stand in the gap for her, and say, you know what, God, I'm going to be her brother or her friend from a distance. And I'm going to be her friend whenever she needs to talk to you, be that ear for her. Whenever she needs company or whatever, be there for her. But don't be in her, you know how it is, you get on their nerves when you're in their presence too much? Let her come to your presence. And that's God leading her back to himself. Last question?
Well, I mean, it kind of piggybacked on the other one. How do you know when God is speaking or showing you something?
Yes, say it anyway. Yeah. For the camera.
All right, this one kind of piggybacks on a previous question. How do you know when God is speaking or showing you something? How do you know when God is speaking or showing you something?
Okay. How do you know when God is speaking and showing you something? See, I always talk about this story because it was one time, you know, when you're a little kid, man, I don't know if it was Food Line or the Giant Penny. I don't know what store I was at. But I was a little kid and I got lost in the store. You know what I'm saying? So while I was lost in the store, I don't know what aisle I was in. I just see it right now. I know it was Three Little Pigs was big back then. They had anyway, what happened was I was lost in the store. Couldn't find my mom. Now, as a kid, that's just traumatizing, right? You was shook too? I was shook, bro. So what happened was, out of all the voices in the mall, not the mall, but the store, I could hear my mom's. My mom's voice don't sound like nobody else's. I know my mother's voice. When you tune your ears to how God speaks, you will know his voice. Listen, you know when God speaks to you when you are still, when you like, hold up. You ever had those moments where you just like something intervened in my life here and is speaking to me? One thing you know, let me see the question one more time. You know when God is speaking, it's almost, I can only describe the feeling. The feeling I have when God is speaking is that it grabs my attention. It paralyzes me. It stops me in my tracks. It's a comforting thing. I mean, there's times when God be like, I want you to post this right now. And that's 3 o'clock in the morning, I post it. Or God be like, I want you, and it's just like, it stops you in your tracks. It's not a begging, nagging voice. It's a voice that says, do this. And you just be like, okay, I'm going to do it. And you know when God is trying to show you something, when you just can't shake it off your attention. You just can't shake it from you. I have to pay this attention. I have to focus on this. And God's presence alone will just grip you. So that's when you know when God is speaking. When you know God is speaking, it's based upon it just grabs your attention, it grabs your focus, it stops you in your tracks, and it demands your attention. You know when God's trying to show you something when you focus on, like, one thing about my mom. I always talk about my sister. I talk about my sisters here. I know when God's trying to show me something about my sisters, he'll begin to show me images of them. He'll begin to show me. He just put them on my heart. You ever had that moment you just put them on your heart and you got to call them? It happened like this, and I tell this story. I was like, God, why you got me up to 5 in the morning? Most of y'all believe, y'all like, bro, you always up to 5 in the morning. But anyway, this particular night, I was up to 5, and I said, God, I was fighting for my sleep. So I got on Facebook. I just felt led to get on Facebook. God didn't say get on Facebook. It was just like I just felt led to get on Facebook, and I saw my sister online, and I just called my sister. I just called her. Or I felt led to call her. And she says, I prayed 10 minutes ago that, God, will you please let my brother call me? Listen, when God tells you to do something and do something on behalf of him, sometimes you stumble into doing it. Sometimes you just yanked into doing it. But when you do it, you're like, man, you kept me up to 5 in the morning. 10 minutes before I called, my sister was begging for me to call. My sister's very shy. She don't be want to ask me for nothing. And all of a sudden, it's like, man, this was a divine moment. So when God intervenes in you, you just can't shake it. Listen, because He wants to partner with you in that moment to help somebody else or help yourself. Yeah.
I'll just say I posted this recently. I was reading a book, or I am reading a book by Francis Chan. And one of the things that he said is that oftentimes we can't hear God's voice because everything around us, our life is just entirely too noisy. And when we hear that, what we think is, oh, I'm too busy, I'm doing too much, maybe I'm watching the wrong shows, or I'm listening to the wrong things, or I spend too much time on Twitter, or whatever, what have you. We think about all these external things, all these negative things. But sometimes the loudest influences in our life, and sometimes the things that are blocking us or preventing us from hearing God clearly are relatively good things. A lot of times we don't hear God clearly because, well, first of all, let me preface all of this by saying that the best way to hear God or to learn His voice or to learn how He speaks or just to learn about Him, period, is to read the Bible. But how many of us trade reading the Bible for reading a devotional that somebody else wrote when they were reading the Bible, or listening to a sermon that somebody else got when they were reading the Bible, or listening to worship songs that somebody else came up with as they were reading the Bible? Yes, worship songs are great, and sermons and podcasts are great, and devotionals and all of these books and all of these things are great, but nothing in your Christian walk, nothing should take the place of you spending time with your own Bible. Because if God can speak to everybody else who wrote books and does sermons and makes podcasts and sings songs and give them something that they can put into that out of the Bible, why can't He do that for you? And so when you're thinking about why you can't hear God, are you listening to Him, or are you listening to Him via this person, that person, this person, that person? Have you ever played telephone when you were in like middle school or elementary school, and it starts off with one person and it goes around the room, and by the time it gets to you, it is not at all what the first person said?
I'm thinking about the cuts with the string.
No, that's not it. No. So telephone, for Josh and other people, is when, like, if I whisper something in Ishmael's ear and he whispers it to Josh and Josh whispers it to Megan, and it goes around the room, and eventually when the last person gets up and says whatever it is that reached their ears and it's not what I said, that's the same thing that happens when, yes, you're reading these amazing books by amazing Christian authors, and you're listening to these amazing worship songs, and you're worshiping, and you're getting all of this good knowledge, but nothing should ever trump the time that you spend in your very own Bible. Because if God can speak to Jim, Sally, and Sue, He can speak to you too. So
this is kind of how I can distinguish God's voice personally. Sometimes when we want God to handle certain issues, we want Him to handle certain issues, He wants to handle things that we need. So what I mean by that is, I can tell a little story. It's going to be short. I had gotten into it with my dad one time, and to be honest with you, he was wrong about the situation. He was wrong about it, and so I left. I got in my car and I left. But one thing that I was talking to guys like, God, can you please take care of my father? He's irrational. He's being wrong. And one thing I heard God say is that He said, honor your father and mother, that you have long days on this earth. He didn't say honor your father and mother if they are right or if they're wrong. He just simply said, honor your father and mother. So, in other words, God handled the issue that I needed to be dealt with versus the issue that I wanted Him to deal with. So, I wanted Him to deal with my father, but in return, God dealt with me. So, when God does that, when you hear that, that's God in a nutshell. So,
that's good.
That's it.
To me, that's it. Really, that's it.
Oh, that's it. Oh, I'm bad. We have 10 minutes. I got caught up in what Deacon was talking about. We have any questions from the audience? Any questions? I could take one or two. Yeah, about 5-10 more minutes. If not, we can stop here. It could be about anything. Ashley just sitting there like, I got a question. She's going to give us some deep questions. So what was Jesus like when He was 4? I'm like, girl, I don't know. Anybody? We good? Let's give it up for our panel. Thank y'all so much for coming. We're going to go ahead in our prayer circle. We're going to take some time to pray. So we get in a big circle, so we hold hands.